The morning rain had turned the sidewalks of downtown Chicago into slippery mirrors, reflecting the gray October sky. Sarah Martinez walked with measured steps toward the security checkpoint at the federal building, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a worn leather jacket that had seen better days. To anyone watching, she looked like just another visitor trying to navigate the bureaucratic maze of government offices. She had been looking forward to this meeting for weeks. After 15 years of classified operations that couldn't be discussed at dinner parties or family gatherings, Sarah was finally transitioning to a consultant role with the Department of Defense. Today's meeting would outline her new position, one where she could use her expertise to train the next generation of special operations personnel without disappearing for months at a time into places that didn't officially exist. The line at security moved slowly, filled with the usual mix of government employees returning from lunch, lawyers with briefcases, and citizens hopping to resolve various administrative matters. Sarah stood patiently, checking her phone for any last-minute changes to her appointment time. She had learned patience in far more challenging circumstances than a routine security line. Behind her, she could hear the increasingly agitated voice of a man complaining loudly about the wait. "This is ridiculous," he kept saying. "Don't these people know some of us have important business to conduct?" His voice carried the particular tone of someone accustomed to having his complaints taken seriously. Sarah glanced back briefly and saw a man in an expensive suit, probably in his late 40s, with perfectly styled hair and a watch that cost more than most people's monthly salary. He was the type who had clearly never waited for anything in his life and found the experience personally offensive. As the line moved forward, Sarah found herself directly in front of him. She could feel his impatience radiating like heat from a furnace. When an elderly woman ahead of them struggled with removing her jacket and shoes for the X-ray machine, the man's frustration reached a boiling point. "Come on, lady, move it along," he muttered, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Some of us have real work to do." Sarah turned slightly and gave him a calm look. "She's doing her best," she said quietly. "We all get there eventually." The man's eyes narrowed. He looked her up and down, taking in her casual clothes and unassuming appearance, and his expression shifted to one of obvious dismissal. "Listen, sweetheart, I don't need life advice from someone who looks like she's here to apply for food stamps." The comment hung in the air like smoke. Several people in line turned to look, sensing the tension. Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same feeling she had experienced in hostile territory when staying invisible meant staying alive. She simply turned back around and continued waiting. But the man wasn't finished. As they reached the metal detector, he became increasingly aggressive, muttering comments about people who don't belong in important government buildings, and why don't these people understand their place. When Sarah stepped through the metal detector, it beeped. Standard procedure required her to step aside for additional screening. As she moved to the designated area, she accidentally brushed against the man as he pushed past her impatiently. "Watch where you're going," he snapped. Then without warning, he placed both hands on her shoulders and shoved her hard to the side. Sarah stumbled but quickly regained her balance. The security guards immediately stepped forward, but before they could intervene, the man was already through the detector and grabbing his belongings from the conveyor belt. "You need to control these people better," he said to the guards, gesturing dismissively at Sarah. "I'm Robert. I'm here for a meeting with Senator's staff about the Defense Appropriations Committee. I don't have time for this nonsense." He straightened his tie, grabbed his briefcase, and walked away without looking back, clearly believing the matter was settled in his favor. The security guards looked at Sarah with apologetic expressions. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you want to file a complaint?" one of them asked. Sarah shook her head with a slight smile. "I'm fine, thank you. These things happen." After completing her security screening, Sarah made her way to the elevator bank. As the doors closed, she allowed herself a moment to process what had just occurred. In her years of service, she had faced down terrorists, negotiated with warlords, and led operations in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. But somehow, being dismissed and physically pushed by an arrogant businessman in her own country felt uniquely insulting. The elevator opened on the 12th floor, and Sarah walked down the familiar hallway to conference room 1247. She paused outside the door, straightening her jacket and checking her reflection in the polished nameplate. Whatever had just happened downstairs, she had a job to do. Inside the conference room, she was greeted by Colonel James, a man she had worked with numerous times over the years. He stood and extended his hand with a genuine smile. "Sarah, good to see you again. How was your flight from?" "Smooth enough, Colonel. Good to see you too." "Please call me Jim. We're both civilians now, more or less." He gestured to a chair across from him at the polished conference table. "I hope you're as excited about this new role as we are to have you." Sarah took her seat and opened her portfolio. "I'm looking forward to it. After 15 years in the field, training the next generation feels like the right next step." Colonel nodded. "Your record speaks for itself. 3 successful hostage rescues, counterterrorism operations across 4 continents, and leadership of Task Force Sentinel for the past 5 years. The Pentagon wants someone with your experience to develop new training protocols." They spent the next hour discussing the specifics of her new position. Sarah would be designing and implementing advanced combat training programs, with particular focus on urban warfare and hostage rescue situations. Her years leading one of the military's most elite special operations units had given her insights that couldn't be found in any manual. "There's one more thing," Colonel said as their meeting was winding down. "We're hosting a demonstration for some congressional staff members next week. Defense appropriations season, you know how it is. They want to see what their money is buying." Sarah nodded. She understood the political realities that kept military programs funded. "Senator's office is sending a few people, including some private sector consultants who advise on defense spending. It would be good for them to meet you, understand the caliber of people we're bringing into these programs." "Of course, I'm happy to participate." Colonel gathered his papers and stood. "Excellent. The demonstration is scheduled for next Tuesday at the training facility. We'll have some of our current special operations teams run through scenarios, and you can speak to the training methodologies." As Sarah walked back toward the elevators, she felt genuinely optimistic about her future for the first time in months. The transition from active duty to civilian life had been more challenging than she had expected, but this new role seemed like the perfect bridge between her past experience and whatever came next. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. As the floors ticked by, she found herself thinking about the incident at security. The man's behavior had been inexcusable, but she had encountered much worse treatment in her career. What bothered her wasn't the personal slight, but rather what it represented about how some people viewed others based on appearances alone. In her work, snap judgments could be fatal. She had learned to read people accurately, to see past surfaces to understand motivations and capabilities. The man who had pushed her had looked at her casual clothes and unassuming appearance and made assumptions about her worth and place in the world. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Sarah walked through the lobby toward the exit. The security guards nodded respectfully as she passed, and she returned their acknowledgement with a smile. Outside, the rain had stopped, and thin streams of sunlight were beginning to break through the clouds. As she walked to her car, Sarah reflected on the strange dichotomy of her life. In classified briefings, she was briefed by generals and consulted with intelligence agencies about matters of national security. But in everyday civilian interactions, she was often invisible, just another face in the crowd. She had grown comfortable with that invisibility during her active service years. Being underestimated was often an advantage in her line of work. Enemies who didn't see her coming were enemies who couldn't prepare for her capabilities. But now, transitioning to a more public role, she wondered if that invisibility would continue to serve her well, or if it was time to be more forthcoming about her background and achievements. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister Maria. "How did the meeting go? Are you officially a civilian now?" Sarah smiled as she typed back. "Meeting went great, still partially classified, but getting there. Tell the kids Aunt Sarah will be around for more birthday parties now." As she drove through the Chicago traffic toward her hotel, Sarah felt a sense of closure about one chapter of her life and anticipation about the next. She had spent years serving her country in ways that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Now she would have the opportunity to share that knowledge with others, to make sure the next generation of special operations personnel was as prepared as possible for the challenges they would face. The incident at security was already fading from her mind, just another brief encounter with someone whose path would probably never cross hers again. She had more important things to focus on, like preparing for her new role and figuring out how to translate 15 years of classified experience into training programs that could be discussed in unclassified settings. That evening, as she reviewed her notes from the meeting in her hotel room, Sarah felt truly content for the first time in months. Tomorrow, she would fly back to North Carolina to begin the process of officially transitioning out of Task Force Sentinel and into her new consulting role. She had no idea that the man who had dismissed and pushed her that afternoon would soon discover exactly who she was, or that their paths would cross again under very different circumstances. For now, she was simply looking forward to the next chapter of her life, unaware that her reputation would soon speak far louder than her unassuming appearance ever could. Robert prided himself on efficiency and control. As a senior partner at & Associates, a consulting firm specializing in defense contracting, he had built his reputation on knowing exactly who mattered in Washington's complex web of political and military relationships. His client list included 3 of the largest defense contractors in the country, and his advice on which military programs deserved funding carried weight in congressional offices. The week following his encounter at the federal building had been particularly busy. His firm was preparing for a crucial presentation to Senators' Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, and Robert had spent countless hours reviewing classified budget documents and technical specifications for various military programs. His corner office on the 32nd floor of a downtown Chicago skyscraper reflected his success. Floor-to-ceiling, windows offered a commanding view of the city, while the walls displayed his numerous awards and photographs with important political figures. A MBA hung prominently behind his desk, along with pictures of him shaking hands with generals and senators. Robert had worked hard to cultivate relationships with military leadership over the past decade. He understood that defense spending was not just about buying equipment, but about maintaining relationships and understanding the complex hierarchy of military decision-making. His success came from knowing who to call, who to impress, and who could be safely ignored. That Tuesday morning, Robert was reviewing his notes for the upcoming demonstration when his assistant knocked on his door. "Mr. Senator's office just called. They've moved up the demonstration to today. Apparently, there was a schedule conflict with next week's date." Robert frowned. He disliked last-minute changes, but Senator's office was not a place where one complained about inconveniences. "What time?" 2 o'clock this afternoon. They're sending a car to pick you up at 1:15. Robert checked his watch. It was already 11:30, which gave him just enough time to review his materials and prepare for what would be an important afternoon. These demonstrations were crucial opportunities to see how defense dollars were being spent and to assess whether the military's requests for funding were justified. The drive took longer than expected due to traffic, but Robert arrived at the Marine Corps base with a few minutes to spare. He was met at the gate by a young lieutenant who checked his credentials and provided him with a visitor's badge. "Sir, I'll be escorting you to the demonstration area. The other congressional staff members are already assembled." As they drove through the base, Robert felt the familiar sense of importance that came with these exclusive visits. Not everyone got to see elite military training up close, and his access to these demonstrations was a testament to his influence in defense circles. The demonstration area was a sophisticated training facility designed to simulate various combat scenarios. Bleachers had been set up for the observers, and Robert could see several familiar faces among the assembled group. There was from Senator's staff, Dr. Williams from the Pentagon's training division, and a few other consultants he recognized from previous events. Lieutenant Colonel, the base's training coordinator, stood at a podium addressing the assembled group. "Ladies and thank you for joining us today. You're about to witness a demonstration of our latest urban warfare training protocols, developed in collaboration with our most experienced special operations personnel." Robert took a seat in the front row, pulling out his tablet to take notes. These demonstrations typically followed a predictable pattern. Teams would run through various scenarios while instructors explained the tactical decisions being made. As a consultant, Robert's job was to assess whether the training represented good value for taxpayer money. "Today's scenarios are based on real-world situations encountered by our Special Forces teams," Lieutenant Colonel continued. "The training protocols were designed by Major Sarah Martinez, who recently transitioned from field operations to a consulting role with our training division." Robert looked up from his tablet, the name sounding vaguely familiar but not immediately placing it. Major Martinez led Task Force Sentinel for 5 years and has extensive experience in hostage rescue, counterterrorism, and urban warfare operations. She'll be explaining the training methodologies as we observe today's exercise. A figure stepped up to the microphone, and Robert's attention was suddenly completely focused. Walking to the podium with confident, measured steps was the woman from the federal building security line. The same woman he had dismissed and pushed aside just a week earlier. But everything about her was different now. Gone were the casual jeans and worn leather jacket. Instead, she wore a crisp military uniform with ribbons and decorations that Robert was knowledgeable enough to recognize as extremely prestigious. Her posture was unmistakably that of a seasoned military officer, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Good afternoon," Sarah said, her voice clear and professional. "What you're about to see represents the culmination of 15 years of operational experience and 5 years of leading one of our most elite special operations units." Robert felt his mouth go dry. The woman he had treated with such dismissive contempt was not only a major in the United States military, but apparently one of its most decorated special operations commanders. Task Force Sentinel specializes in high-risk rescue operations and counterterrorism missions, Sarah continued. Our success rate in hostage rescue situations is 97%, and our operational security has never been compromised in over 200 missions. As she spoke, Robert found himself remembering every detail of their encounter at the federal building. His comments about food stamps and not belonging in government buildings echoed in his memory with increasing horror. "The training protocols we've developed are based on real situations my team has encountered in operations across 4 continents, Sarah explained. "Today's demonstration will show you how we prepare personnel for the kinds of complex, high-stakes situations they're likely to face in the field." Leaned over to Robert. "Major Martinez is supposed to be one of our most valuable assets," she whispered. "Her operational record is classified, but the briefings we've received suggest she's been involved in some of our most successful missions over the past decade." Robert nodded numbly, his mind racing through the implications of what he was learning. Not only had he badly misjudged this woman, but he had physically assaulted a decorated military officer who was apparently held in extremely high regard by the Pentagon and congressional leadership. The demonstration began with a complex hostage rescue scenario. A team of 6 special operations personnel moved through a simulated building with precision that was almost choreographed. Sarah provided commentary on their tactical decisions, explaining how each movement was designed to minimize risk while maximizing the chances of mission success. "Notice how the team leader signals for the breach," Sarah narrated. "This particular approach was developed after we encountered a similar situation in Syria 3 years ago. The original protocol would have resulted in civilian casualties." Robert tried to focus on taking notes, but his concentration was completely shattered. Every time Sarah spoke, he was reminded of his behavior at the security checkpoint. The woman he had dismissed as not belonging in a government building was describing military operations that had saved lives and protected national security. As the demonstration progressed, it became clear that Sarah was not just knowledgeable about military tactics, but was genuinely respected by the personnel conducting the exercise. When she suggested modifications to their approach, the team implemented her recommendations immediately and without question. "The key insight that changed our approach to urban warfare," Sarah explained, "came from a mission in Afghanistan where traditional tactics proved inadequate. We learned that flexibility and adaptation are more valuable than rigid adherence to established procedures." Dr. Williams from the Pentagon was taking detailed notes and occasionally nodding approvingly at Sarah's explanations. It was clear that her transition from field operations to training development was considered a significant asset for the military. During a brief break between scenarios, approached Sarah to ask questions about budget implications for the training programs. Robert watched as the 2 women discussed complex budgetary issues with the kind of detailed knowledge that came from years of experience with military appropriations. "Major Martinez said, "The Senator's office is particularly interested in the cost-effectiveness of these programs. Can you speak to the return on investment for this level of specialized training? Sarah smiled confidently. Absolutely. When you consider that each special operations mission can cost millions of dollars and potentially involve significant political ramifications, investing in comprehensive training pays for itself many times over. Our improved protocols have reduced mission failure rates by 30% over the past 3 years. Robert realized he was witnessing not just a military briefing, but in strategic thinking and budget analysis. This woman was operating at a level of expertise and responsibility that he had completely failed to recognize during their first encounter. The second part of the demonstration involved a counterterrorism scenario that was even more complex than the first. Sarah's commentary revealed an understanding of international politics, cultural dynamics, and tactical innovations that impressed even the most experienced observers. This scenario is based on a situation we encountered in Somalia, she explained. The challenge was not just tactical but diplomatic. We had to coordinate with local forces while maintaining operational security and minimizing the risk of international incidents. As she spoke, Robert began to understand the true scope of her experience. This was not just a decorated soldier, but someone who had been involved in operations that shaped international relations and national security policy. When the demonstration concluded, the observers were invited to ask questions. Dr. Williams immediately raised his hand. Major Martinez, how do you see these training protocols evolving as we face new types of threats? Sarah's response was detailed and thoughtful, covering everything from cyber warfare integration to adapting to changing geopolitical realities. Her answers demonstrated not just tactical knowledge, but strategic thinking at the highest levels. Asked about the timeline for implementing the new protocols across all special operations units, and Sarah provided a comprehensive implementation plan that had clearly been carefully developed. As the formal presentation ended, the observers began to mingle and ask informal questions. Robert stood awkwardly on the periphery, unsure how to approach the situation. He knew he should probably introduce himself and try to establish a professional relationship, but the memory of his behavior at the federal building made that seem impossible. He watched as other attendees approached Sarah with obvious respect and deference. These were people who wielded significant influence in defense circles, yet they clearly recognized her expertise and experience as superior to their own. Lieutenant Colonel approached the group and made a comment that caught Robert's attention. Major Martinez will be transitioning to full civilian status next month, but she'll continue as a consultant on these training programs. We're fortunate to have someone with her operational experience helping to shape the next generation of special operations personnel. The implications hit Robert like a physical blow. Not only was this woman a decorated military officer, but she was transitioning to a role where she would have significant influence over defense, training budgets, and contractor relationships. In his line of work, maintaining good relationships with people like Sarah Martinez was not just professionally advantageous, but potentially crucial for his firm's success. As the group began to disperse, Robert realized he was facing a dilemma that went far beyond personal embarrassment. His behavior at the federal building had not just been rude and inappropriate. It had potentially damaged his professional prospects in ways he was only beginning to understand. He watched Sarah shake hands with and Dr. Williams, noting how they treated her with obvious respect and deference. These were the same people who could influence which consulting firms received lucrative government contracts. Robert's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. How did the demonstration go? Any new contacts worth following up with? As he looked at the message, then back at Sarah Martinez talking earnestly with Pentagon officials about the future of special operations training, Robert realized that he had created a problem for himself that went far beyond professional networking. He had revealed something about his character that could not be easily explained away or forgotten. The drive back to Chicago gave him time to think about his situation, but no easy solutions presented themselves. He had built his career on understanding people and relationships, yet he had catastrophically misjudged one of the most important military figures he was likely to encounter in his professional life. As his car pulled into downtown Chicago traffic, Robert began to understand that the consequences of that moment at the federal building were only just beginning to unfold. The following morning, Robert sat in his office staring at his computer screen, unable to concentrate on the quarterly reports that demanded his attention. The events had fundamentally changed his understanding of a situation he thought he had complete control over. Every few minutes, his mind would return to the image of Sarah Martinez, commanding the respect of Pentagon officials and congressional staff members with the same casual confidence she had displayed, while being pushed around at airport security. His phone rang, interrupting his troubled thoughts. The caller ID showed from Senator's office. "Robert, I wanted to follow up on yesterday's demonstration." His voice was businesslike but friendly. The senator was pleased with the preliminary reports and were moving forward with increased funding for the Special Operations training programs. "That's excellent news," Robert managed, trying to sound professionally engaged. "There's something else. We're organizing a dinner reception next Thursday for key stakeholders in the defense community. Major Martinez will be there, along with several Pentagon officials and contractor representatives. The senator wants to make sure all the important players have a chance to meet her before her transition to civilian consulting becomes official." Robert's stomach dropped. "A reception?" "Yes, at the hotel in Washington. 7 o'clock. I'm sending you the formal invitation today, but I wanted to give you advance notice. Major Martinez's expertise is going to be crucial for future training budget decisions, so it's important that our consulting partners establish good working relationships with her." After hung up, Robert sat in his chair feeling like he was trapped in a nightmare that kept getting worse. Not only would he have to face Sarah Martinez again, but it would be in a formal professional setting where his behavior and reputation would be under scrutiny from some of the most important people in defense contracting. He spent the rest of the week trying to develop a strategy for the reception. His first instinct was to avoid attending altogether, but that would be professional suicide. Had made it clear that building a relationship with Major Martinez was not optional for consultants who wanted to remain relevant in defense circles. His second thought was to approach her directly and apologize, but that carried its own risks. Acknowledging his behavior would confirm that it had happened, and there was no guarantee that she would be willing to forgive or forget. Worse, it might draw attention to the incident that could damage his reputation with other attendees. By Thursday afternoon, Robert had decided on a strategy of cautious professionalism. He would attend the reception, avoid drawing attention to his previous encounter with Major Martinez, and hope to gradually rebuild his standing through demonstrated expertise in defense consulting. The hotel's ballroom was elegantly decorated for the occasion, with round tables arranged throughout the space, and a small stage where Senator would presumably make remarks about the importance of military training programs. Robert arrived precisely on time, wearing his most expensive suit and his most confident expression. The room was already filling with familiar faces from the defense community. Robert recognized several Pentagon officials, representatives from major contractors, and staff members from various congressional offices. These were the people who shaped defense policy and spending decisions, and Robert had spent years cultivating relationships within this group. He made his way to the bar and ordered a scotch, using the time to survey the room and plan his approach for the evening. Near the stage, he could see talking with a group that included Dr. Williams and several other Pentagon officials. Sarah Martinez was not immediately visible, which gave Robert a few minutes to prepare himself for their inevitable encounter. "Robert, isn't it?" a voice said behind him. Robert turned to find Colonel, whom he recognized from previous defense briefings. "Colonel, good to see you again." "I wanted to thank you for attending the demonstration said. Major Martinez was impressed with the quality of questions from the congressional observers. It's always helpful when our civilian oversight partners understand the complexities of what we're trying to accomplish." Robert nodded, though he hadn't actually asked any questions during the demonstration. Major Martinez certainly seems to know her business. "Oh, she's remarkable," continued enthusiastically. 15 years in special operations, including some missions that will probably never be. The Pentagon considers her transition to training development one of the most important personnel moves we've made in years. As spoke, Robert noticed a small commotion near the entrance to the ballroom. Several people were turning to look as someone entered, and he could see smiles and nods of recognition throughout the crowd. Sarah Martinez walked into the room wearing a perfectly tailored black dress that somehow managed to look both elegant and professional. Her confident bearing was even more pronounced in this setting, and Robert watched as people naturally gravitated toward her to offer greetings and congratulations on her new role. "There she is now," said, following Robert's gaze. "You should definitely make sure to introduce yourself tonight. Her influence on training budgets is going to be significant." Robert nodded weakly as excused himself and walked over to join the growing group around Sarah. From across the room, Robert could see her engaging easily with Pentagon officials and congressional staff members, clearly comfortable in high-level political settings. Senator appeared on the small stage and called for attention. "Ladies, and thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate some of the finest people serving our national defense interests." The senator's remarks were brief but pointed. He emphasized the importance of effective military training and the need for continued congressional support for special operations programs. When he mentioned Major Martinez by name, describing her as one of our most valuable assets in the ongoing fight against international terrorism, the applause was notably enthusiastic. After the senator finished speaking, the reception resumed with a more relaxed atmosphere. Robert knew he would have to approach Sarah eventually, but he continued to postpone the inevitable while he watched her interactions with other attendees. What struck him most was how differently people treated her compared to their encounter at the federal building. Here, she was clearly recognized as someone whose opinions mattered, whose experience was valued, and whose future influence was worth cultivating. The contrast with his own dismissive behavior was becoming more painful by the minute. "Mr." Robert turned to find approaching with Sarah Martinez beside her. His heart began racing as he realized the moment he had been dreading was finally arriving. "I wanted to make sure you had a chance to meet Major Martinez," continued. "Major, this is Robert from & Associates. His firm provides consulting services for defense appropriations decisions." Sarah extended her hand with a professional smile that showed no recognition of their previous encounter. "Mr. Pleasure to meet you." Robert shook her hand, his mind racing through possible responses. Her expression was perfectly neutral, giving no indication whether she remembered him or had chosen to ignore their previous meeting. "The pleasure is mine, Major Martinez. Your presentation was very impressive." "Thank you. I understand you work with congressional offices on defense budget analysis." "Yes, primarily focusing on training program effectiveness and resource allocation." Their conversation continued for several minutes, touching on various aspects of military training budgets and the challenges of modernizing special operations programs. Sarah's knowledge of budget processes and political realities was as impressive as her tactical expertise, and Robert found himself genuinely engaged in their discussion despite his underlying anxiety. What surprised him most was how naturally she handled the interaction. If she recognized him from the federal building, she gave absolutely no indication. Her professionalism was complete and unshakable, and she treated him with the same courtesy and attention she had shown to other attendees. "One thing I've learned in my transition to civilian consulting," Sarah said, "is how important it is to have good working relationships across the entire defense community. Military effectiveness depends on cooperation between service members, civilians, contractors, and political representatives." Robert nodded, wondering if her comment contained any hidden meaning related to their previous encounter. "I completely agree," he said. "Effective defense requires people from very different backgrounds working toward common goals." Rejoined their conversation, having stepped away to speak with Dr. Williams. "Major Martinez, the senator would like to introduce you to some representatives from the House Armed Services Committee before they leave." Sarah nodded and turned back to Robert. "Mr. I hope we'll have opportunities to work together as I settle into my new role. Your perspective on congressional priorities would be valuable as we develop new training programs." "I would welcome that opportunity," Robert replied, though he wasn't sure if he meant it or was simply responding automatically. As Sarah walked away with, Robert remained standing alone, trying to process what had just happened. Their conversation had been entirely professional and pleasant, with no acknowledgement of their previous encounter. Either she didn't recognize him, or she had chosen to handle the situation with complete professionalism. Dr. Williams approached Robert a few minutes later. "I saw you talking with Major Martinez. Impressive woman, isn't she?" "Very much so," Robert agreed. "The Pentagon is expecting great things from her consulting work. She has the kind of operational experience that can't be taught or simulated. People with her background and security clearances don't grow on trees." As the evening continued, Robert found himself observing Sarah from across the room. She moved easily between different groups, equally comfortable discussing tactical details with military personnel and budget implications with civilian officials. Her ability to connect with people from different backgrounds was remarkable, and Robert began to understand why she had been so successful in special operations work. Near the end of the reception, Robert was standing alone near the bar when Sarah approached him. "Mister, I wanted to thank you for the conversation earlier. It's helpful to understand how congressional consultants view military training programs." "Thank you, Major Martinez. I found our discussion very informative as well." She paused for a moment, and for the first time that evening, her professional mask seemed to slip slightly. "You know, I've learned over the years that first impressions can be very misleading. People are often much more complex and capable than they appear at first glance." Robert felt his heart stop. The comment was delivered in the same neutral, professional tone she had used all evening, but the meaning was unmistakable. She did remember their encounter at the federal building. "I think that's a very wise observation," Robert managed. "I've found that the most successful military operations happen when people are able to move past their initial assumptions about each other and focus on their common objectives." She smiled slightly, and Robert realized she was offering him something that he hadn't expected, a chance to prove himself beyond his initial failure. "I hope we'll have opportunities to work together effectively in the future," she continued. "Good evening, mister." As she walked away, Robert stood alone with his thoughts racing. She had recognized him all along, but instead of embarrassing him publicly or holding his behavior against him professionally, she had offered him a path forward. Her handling of the situation demonstrated a level of grace and strategic thinking that impressed him even more than her military record. For the first time since the incident at the federal building, Robert began to believe that he might be able to recover from his mistakes. But he also understood that Sarah Martinez had just given him a gift that he couldn't afford to waste. The drive back to his hotel gave him time to reflect on everything that had happened. He had encountered someone who possessed not only exceptional professional capabilities, but also the character to handle personal slights with dignity and strategic wisdom. As he prepared for bed that night, Robert realized that his opinion of Sarah Martinez had a complete transformation. She was not just a decorated military officer or an influential consultant, but someone who had demonstrated qualities of leadership and character that he genuinely admired. More importantly, he understood that his own behavior needed to change if he wanted to be worthy of the second chance she had offered him. 3 weeks after the reception at the hotel, Robert found himself facing a crisis that would test everything he had learned about himself and the people he worked with. His firm had been selected to conduct an emergency assessment of a military training facility following a serious accident during a special operations exercise. The incident had resulted in 2 injuries and raised questions about safety protocols that could affect millions of dollars in defense appropriations. The call came on a Friday afternoon from his office. "Robert, we need an associates to lead an independent review of the training incident at Fort Campbell. The Senate Armed Services Committee wants a preliminary report by Wednesday." Robert understood the implications immediately. A negative report could lead to suspension of training programs and budget cuts that would affect not just military readiness, but also the consulting contracts his firm depended on. The assignment was both an opportunity to demonstrate his firm's capabilities and a potential disaster if not handled properly. "We'll need to coordinate with the military personnel who designed the training protocols," continued. "Major Martinez will be your primary point of contact since she developed the original safety procedures." Robert felt his stomach tighten. Working closely with Sarah Martinez would require a level of professional trust and collaboration that he wasn't sure he had earned after their initial encounter. "I understand. When do we start?" "Monday morning at Fort Campbell. Major Martinez is flying in from North Carolina to assist with the review. The base commander has been instructed to provide you with full access and cooperation." That weekend, Robert spent his time reviewing everything he could find about the training facility and the specific exercise that had resulted in the accident. The incident involved a live-fire urban warfare simulation that had gone wrong when communications equipment failed at a crucial moment. Two special operations personnel had been injured when they entered a building that hadn't been properly cleared. What concerned Robert most was that the training protocol had been designed by Sarah Martinez's team based on their operational experience. If the investigation revealed fundamental flaws in the safety procedures, it could damage not only the training program but also Sarah's reputation as she transitioned to civilian consulting. Monday morning found Robert driving through the gates of Fort Campbell with a team of 3 analysts from his firm. The base was impressive in its scale and obvious dedication to military excellence, with training facilities that represented some of the most advanced military technology in the world. They were met at the base headquarters by Colonel, the commanding officer, and Sarah Martinez. Robert hadn't seen her since the reception in Washington, and once again he was struck by her professional confidence and commanding presence. "Mr. Colonel said, Major Martinez will be working directly with your team to analyze the incident and identify any necessary improvements to our safety protocols." Sarah stepped forward with a firm handshake and direct eye contact. "Mr. I appreciate your firm taking on this review. The safety of our personnel is obviously our highest priority, and we want to understand exactly what went wrong." Her tone was completely professional, with no trace of personal history or complicated emotions. Robert realized that she was approaching this assignment with the same focus and dedication she would bring to any military operation. "Major Martinez, we're committed to conducting a thorough and objective analysis. I know this situation is sensitive given your role in developing the original protocols." "I appreciate your directness," she replied. "I want you to understand that I'm not here to defend my work or to influence your findings. If there are problems with the safety procedures, I want to identify them and fix them." The next 3 days were intensive and revealing in ways Robert hadn't expected. Working closely with Sarah gave him insights into both her professional capabilities and her character that went far beyond their previous brief encounters. Her approach to the investigation was methodical and completely honest. She walked Robert's team through every aspect of the training protocol, explaining the reasoning behind each safety procedure and identifying potential weaknesses without defensiveness or evasion. "This particular exercise was designed based on a mission we conducted in Iraq," she explained as they reviewed the accident site. "The challenge was adapting real-world tactics to a training environment while maintaining safety margins." Robert watched her analyze the failed communications equipment with the same attention to detail he had observed during the demonstration. But what impressed him most was her willingness to consider the possibility that her own work might be flawed. "The communications failure shouldn't have resulted in injuries if our safety protocols were adequate," she said bluntly. "Either the personnel weren't properly trained on the procedures, or the procedures themselves have gaps that need to be addressed." As they reviewed the incident timeline, Robert began to understand the complexity of designing training exercises that prepared military personnel for real combat while maintaining safety in an artificial environment. Sarah's protocols were sophisticated and comprehensive, but they also revealed the inherent tension between realistic training and absolute safety. "Every training exercise involves calculated risks," she explained during one of their analysis sessions. "The question is whether we calculated those risks correctly and whether our safety measures were adequate." Robert found himself genuinely impressed by her intellectual honesty and professional integrity. She could easily have blamed the incident on equipment failure or personnel error, but instead she was focused on understanding systemic issues that might prevent similar accidents in the future. On the second day of their investigation, they interviewed the personnel who had been involved in the training exercise. Robert expected these sessions to be tense, given that the soldiers were speaking with civilian investigators about an accident involving protocols designed by their commanding officer. Instead, he observed something remarkable. The military personnel spoke about Sarah with obvious respect and trust, even when discussing aspects of the training that had contributed to their injuries. Major Martinez always emphasized that no training exercise was worth permanent injury, one of the injured soldiers told them. She made it clear that we should abort any exercise if we felt unsafe, regardless of mission objectives. The soldier went on to explain that the communications failure had created a situation where standard safety protocols became unclear, but that no one blamed the original training design for what had happened. "The Major's protocols saved our lives," the other injured soldier said emphatically. "If we hadn't been wearing the safety equipment she required, or if we hadn't been trained on her emergency procedures, this would have been a lot worse." As Robert listened to these interviews, he began to understand that Sarah had not just designed training exercises, but had created a culture of safety consciousness that had actually minimized the consequences of the equipment failure. Their investigation also revealed something else that surprised Robert. Sarah's protocols were significantly more conservative than standard military training procedures. Where other special operations units might accept higher levels of risk in pursuit of realistic training, her programs consistently prioritized personnel safety, even when it meant less challenging exercises. "I learned early in my career that dead heroes don't complete missions," she explained when Robert asked about her safety-focused approach. "The same principle applies to training. Injured trainees don't become effective special operations personnel." By the third day of their investigation, Robert's team had identified the primary cause of the accident: a previously unknown incompatibility between communications equipment and the building's construction materials that had caused signal interference at a critical moment. The equipment failure was not something that Sarah's protocols could have anticipated, and her safety procedures had actually prevented more serious injuries. But rather than simply accepting these findings and moving on, Sarah insisted on examining whether the incident revealed broader weaknesses in their training approach. "Even if this specific equipment failure was unforeseeable," she said during their final analysis session, "we should consider whether our protocols are robust enough to handle unexpected communication breakdowns." She proposed several modifications to the safety procedures that would provide additional protection against similar equipment failures, even though the investigation had essentially vindicated her original design. As Robert prepared his preliminary report, he realized that his assessment would not only clear Sarah of any responsibility for the accident, but would actually recommend adopting her safety protocols more widely across other training facilities. The night before their report was due, Robert found himself working late in the temporary office the base had provided for their investigation. Around 9 o'clock, Sarah knocked on his door. "Mister, do you have a few minutes to review the final recommendations?" She entered with a folder containing her own analysis of the incident and proposed improvements to the safety protocols. As they discussed the technical details, Robert found himself genuinely enjoying the collaboration with someone whose expertise and judgment he had come to respect. "Major Martinez," he said during a pause in their discussion, "I want you to know that working with you on this investigation has been one of the most professionally rewarding experiences of my career." She looked up from the documents with a slight smile. "I appreciate that, mister. You've conducted this review with real integrity, and I know that couldn't have been easy given the political pressures involved." There was a moment of comfortable silence before Sarah spoke again. "You know, I've been thinking about our first encounter at the federal building." Robert felt his heart skip, but her tone remained calm and thoughtful. "I realized that your reaction wasn't really about me personally. You made assumptions based on limited information, which is something we all do. The difference is that most of us don't face consequences for our quick judgments the way you did." Robert wasn't sure how to respond, but she continued before he could find words. "What I've observed over the past few days is someone who's willing to challenge his own assumptions and change his approach based on new information. That's actually a pretty valuable quality in both military operations and civilian consulting." She gathered her papers and stood to leave. "Your report is going to be influential in how the military approaches training safety going forward. I hope you know that the work you've done here will probably save lives." After she left, Robert sat alone in the empty office, reflecting on how much had changed since their encounter at the federal building. He had started this investigation worried about managing a professional relationship complicated by personal history, but he was ending it with genuine respect for someone whose character and capabilities had far exceeded his expectations. More importantly, he understood that Sarah Martinez had given him something more valuable than professional courtesy or even forgiveness. She had shown him what it looked like to approach difficult situations with integrity, honesty, and a commitment to outcomes that mattered more than personal reputation. His report would recommend not only clearing the training protocols of any responsibility for the accident, but adopting Sarah's safety-focused approach as a model for special operations training throughout the military. It was a recommendation based on evidence and analysis, but it was also Robert's way of acknowledging what he had learned about both professional excellence and personal character. 6 months after the Fort Campbell investigation, Robert received an invitation that would have seemed impossible during his lowest moments following the federal building incident. The Pentagon was hosting a ceremony to honor Major Sarah Martinez as she formally transitioned to full civilian status, and Robert's firm had been specifically requested to attend by Sarah herself. The invitation arrived on elegant Department of Defense letterhead, formally announcing the ceremony but including a handwritten note. "Mr. I hope you'll join us as I begin the next chapter. Your support during the Fort Campbell review meant more than you know. S. Martinez." Robert stared at the note for several minutes, remembering the journey that had brought him to this point. The Fort Campbell investigation had not only cleared Sarah's training protocols, but had led to their adoption across multiple military installations. Robert's report had been cited in congressional hearings and had strengthened funding for advanced safety training programs. More importantly for Robert personally, the investigation had established him as a consultant who prioritized accuracy and integrity over political convenience. His willingness to recommend Sarah's protocols, even when it would have been easier to identify scapegoats, had earned him respect throughout the defense community. The ceremony was held in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, a space normally reserved for the most significant military recognitions. As Robert entered the impressive room, he was struck by the caliber of attendees. Generals, senators, and senior Pentagon officials filled the space, all there to honor someone who had dedicated 15 years of her life to protecting national security. Senator was presenting the ceremony and had positioned herself near the front where she could observe both the official proceedings and the political networking that always accompanied such events. "Ladies and," Senator began, "we gather today to honor Major Sarah Martinez as she transitions from active military service to continue serving our nation as a civilian consultant." Robert found himself listening to a recitation of achievements that he had only begun to understand during their time working together. Sarah had led successful operations on 3 continents, developed training protocols that had been adopted by allied militaries, and maintained operational security through missions that had shaped international relations. Major Martinez represents the finest traditions of American military service, the senator continued. Her transition to civilian consulting ensures that her knowledge and experience will continue to benefit our armed forces for years to come. When Sarah stepped forward to receive her commendation, Robert was struck again by the transformation he had witnessed over the past months. The woman who had been dismissed and pushed at a security checkpoint had received recognition from the highest levels of government and military leadership. But what impressed Robert most was how she carried herself during the ceremony. There was no trace of vindication or triumph over those who had underestimated her. Instead, she displayed the same professional grace and genuine humility that had characterized all of their interactions since that first encounter. "Thank you, Senator, and thank you all for this honor," Sarah said as she accepted her commendation. "Military service has always been about something larger than individual recognition. The real honor belongs to the personnel who implement these training programs and who serve in dangerous places around the world." Her brief remarks emphasized the collaborative nature of military success and the importance of supporting the next generation of special operations personnel. She spoke about her new role not as a personal achievement, but as an opportunity to continue serving in a different capacity. After the formal ceremony concluded, a reception was held in an adjacent room. Robert moved through the crowd, noting how naturally Sarah engaged with people from across the military and political spectrum. The skills that had made her successful in special operations clearly translated to civilian leadership roles. Colonel approached Robert during the reception. "Mister, I wanted to thank you again for your work at Fort Campbell. The safety improvements that resulted from your investigation have already prevented several potential accidents. Major Martinez deserves the credit for those improvements, Robert replied. My role was simply to document what she had already developed. That's generous of you, but not entirely accurate. Your willingness to recommend her protocols when you could have taken easier positions showed real integrity. That kind of analysis is exactly what we need from our civilian consulting partners. As the evening progressed, Robert found himself reflecting on how much his understanding of professional relationships had evolved. He had spent years building his reputation on knowing who mattered and positioning himself advantageously within Washington's power structures. But his experience with Sarah had taught him that sustainable success required something more fundamental: the ability to recognize excellence and character regardless of initial appearances or circumstances. Near the end of the reception, Sarah approached him with 2 glasses of champagne. Mister, I wanted to have a chance to speak with you before the evening ends. They moved to a quieter corner of the room where they could talk privately. I've been thinking about our conversation at Fort Campbell, she said, when you mentioned that working together had been professionally rewarding. I wanted you to know that the feeling was mutual. Robert smiled. You've certainly changed my perspective on a number of things. I hope one of those things was the importance of not making quick judgments about people. Definitely, though I have to admit, I'm still embarrassed about our first encounter. Sarah shook her head. Don't be. Everyone makes mistakes in judgment. What matters is what you do afterward. Your work at Fort Campbell showed that you're capable of putting aside personal considerations to focus on what's right. She paused and looked around the room filled with military and political leaders. You know, one of the most important skills in special operations is the ability to quickly assess situations and adapt your approach based on new information. That's exactly what you did during our professional relationship. Robert considered her words. I think I learned more about leadership from working with you than from most of my formal business training. Leadership isn't about commanding respect through position or authority, Sarah replied. It's about earning respect through competence, integrity, and the way you treat others, especially those who can't necessarily help your career. As their conversation continued, Robert realized that Sarah Martinez had not only forgiven his initial misjudgment, but had actively helped him become better at his job and more thoughtful in his personal interactions. Her approach to their relationship had demonstrated principles of leadership that went far beyond military contexts. Joined their conversation, bringing news that would affect both of their futures. Major Martinez, I wanted to let you know that the Senate Armed Services Committee has approved the expansion of your safety protocols to all special operations training facilities. The vote was unanimous, which almost never happens on training budget issues. Sarah looked genuinely surprised and pleased. That's wonderful news. I hope it will make a real difference for personnel safety. Mister's report was instrumental in building support for the expansion, continued. His analysis convinced several senators who had been skeptical about increased training spending. As moved on to other conversations, Sarah turned back to Robert. It sounds like our collaboration at Fort Campbell had more impact than either of us realized. Your safety protocols deserved that recognition. I was just the messenger. You were more than that, she said firmly. You chose to recommend what was right instead of what was politically convenient. That choice will probably save lives. As the reception began to wind down, Robert found himself part of a small group that included Sarah, several Pentagon officials, and other defense consultants. The conversation ranged from technical training issues to broader questions about military readiness and international security. What struck Robert was how naturally Sarah had transitioned to civilian leadership while maintaining the respect she had earned during her military career. Her opinions were sought and valued by people who had known her only in her new consulting role, demonstrating that her influence was based on competence rather than just military rank. Dr. Williams from the Pentagon joined their group and raised a toast. To Major Martinez, whose service has made our nation safer and whose continued work will make our military more effective. As they raised their glasses, Robert felt genuine pride in being part of Sarah's professional circle. More importantly, he understood that his relationship with her had taught him lessons about character, judgment, and professional integrity that would influence the rest of his career. Later that evening, as the reception was ending, Sarah approached Robert one final time. "Mister, I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "My new consulting firm is going to need partners who understand both military requirements and political realities. Would you be interested in discussing a formal collaboration?" Robert was genuinely surprised. "You want to work with me? I've seen how you approach difficult problems, and I respect your commitment to getting things right even when it's not easy. Those are exactly the qualities I want in professional partners." As they shook hands on the possibility of future collaboration, Robert realized that his journey from that embarrassing encounter at the federal building to this moment had taught him everything he needed to know about recognizing and respecting true excellence. The drive back to his hotel gave Robert time to process the magnitude of what had happened. He had not only recovered from his initial misjudgment, but had built a professional relationship based on mutual respect with someone whose expertise and character he genuinely admired. More importantly, Sarah Martinez had shown him what it looked like to transform a negative situation into an opportunity for growth and positive change. Her response to his initial behavior had been in leadership, demonstrating how to maintain dignity while giving others the chance to prove themselves worthy of respect. As Robert prepared for bed that night, he understood that he had learned lessons that would influence not just his career, but his approach to every professional and personal relationship going forward. The woman he had thoughtlessly dismissed and physically pushed had become one of his most respected colleagues and had shown him what excellence looked like when it was combined with genuine character. The next morning, Robert woke up with a clear sense of purpose about his future. He had been given a second chance by someone whose forgiveness he probably didn't deserve, and he was determined to prove worthy of both her trust and the lessons she had taught him about treating all people with the respect they might deserve, regardless of how they appeared at first glance. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Looking forward to working together on projects that matter. Thank you for proving that first impressions don't have to be final judgments." As Robert looked at the message, then out his hotel window at the Washington morning, he realized that his encounter with Sarah Martinez had changed not only his professional prospects, but his understanding of what it meant to be a leader, a colleague, and a person worth knowing. The most valuable lesson he had learned was that excellence and character often come in unexpected packages, and the people who matter most are those who can see past initial mistakes to recognize potential for growth and positive change.